Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone to week 4 of Michigan Farm Bureau's Ag Labor Series. We are glad that you are able to join us this afternoon for our program and look forward to an exciting program with lots of questions and answers from you, the participants. In today's program, we will have brief updates on federal and state legislative labor-related issues and information, including the adverse effect wage rate, and vaccination information that may be helpful to you. John Cran and Ben Terrell are with us from the Michigan Farm Bureau staff to provide those updates. We will then get into the question and answer session. Last week, we asked you all for questions to be answered by our experts during today's program. We received lots of questions and we will go through those. We're glad that Jason Rulig, who is a vegetable farmer from Monroe County and chair of the Michigan Farm Bureau Labor Advisory Committee, has joined us today. He will actually be moderating the question and answer session. So it will be great to have questions from a farmer directed to our experts. We'll wrap up the program with closing comments from our speakers that we have had on the program the past 4 weeks, and try to provide a well-rounded volume of information for you to gather this afternoon. Again, we're glad you are with us. Hope you enjoy the program. If you have questions and answers, questions during today's program, please put those in the question and answer function in the meeting chat, and we will try to get to those. I would also like to remind our viewers today that next week, Varnum Law and Great Lakes Ag Labor Services will be holding a series of meetings the 23rd, 24th, and 25th. That's Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of next week. And they will take a deeper dive into a number of the labor-related issues that we have discussed the past 4 weeks. The information for that has been scrolling on the screen, and we have emailed that information out to the viewers that we have had in our program here the past 4 weeks. So with all of that said, let's get into the program. It's great to have John Cran with us. John is the National Legislative Counsel for Michigan Farm Bureau, and he's going to provide a brief update on some federal issues, in particular, the adverse effect wage rate. John, it's good to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ernie. Happy to be here. Hello, everyone. Real quickly, I want to run through a couple of items that have changed since we last got together with you on the weekly call, and most importantly, the adverse effect wage rate. So a week ago, we heard from USDA, who conducts the Farm Labor Survey. They published their information, and this will now go to Department of Labor, and Department of Labor will actually set the AWAR with this data. But we know the numbers and what they're going to be, so we want to share those with you. This first slide shows that Michigan is going to see a 2.2% increase in the adverse effect wage rate. And if you compare that to some other parts of the country, I mean, if we specifically look at California at an 8.7% increase, we're sitting fairly well. But where this ends us is we go from $14.40 an hour to a new rate of $14.72. And that's about 10 cents over the national average if you take all these into consideration. So next slide, please, Audrey. And here it is, $14.72. So while it's still too high for where we'd like to be long term, you can see we're California is 1605, Washington, Oregon are 1634, but we've got states like Georgia and in 1181 and Louisiana 1188. So definitely some variation across the country on what this looks like. Next slide, Audrey. And so big picture, we've seen a 15% increase in the last 5 years. And if you look across the country, all states are experiencing pretty hefty increases. One thing I'd like to note here is that if you compare this to the employment cost index, a number that the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses, that number for all positions, all types of work across the country has only increased 2.6% over the last year. So definitely much higher for ag and what we're experiencing, but wanted to make sure you had this new information. Look to the Michigan Farm News, yesterday's edition, digital edition too, for a little bit more deep dive on this and some more Michigan specific information from some of our staff. The other thing I'd like to mention is that we did have a Politico article about a week ago that that mentioned that April 1st is kind of a deadline to watch in the immigration discussions. April 1 is the day that immigration bills that passed in the last session of Congress could still come before the full House without having to go through the lengthy deliberation of committee process. And so last session we had a farm worker bill pass, and we had a bill pass that would extend status to the Dreamers. And so these bills could move to the House floor if done before April 1, and receive a vote without having to go through that committee process. So that's something we're keeping an eye on, and know that our priorities continue to be focused on making sure that all of agriculture has a reliable workforce now and into the future, that it takes into consideration the existing workforce, that it takes into consideration a visa program that works well for everyone, knowing that our top priorities continue to be the wage that you're paying, making sure that you've got a flexible program, something that's affordable, user-friendly, all those things as well. So I know we're coming up on my time, so I'm going to pause, and I'm looking forward to some questions here shortly.
Well, John, we're glad to have you keeping track of all the challenging issues that are happening in Washington, D.C. on a daily basis. Labor certainly is at the top of the list for many of our members, and we appreciate the work that you do on behalf of our members at Michigan Farm Bureau and all of agriculture, keeping track of those critical issues and working for Farm Bureau policy and keeping our members in mind. And you're going to be around to help answer questions. We appreciate that. So thanks for that brief update. We're going to quickly transition then to Ben Terrell. Ben is part of the state governmental relations team at Michigan Farm Bureau. Ben is relatively new to staff, as we talked about a couple weeks ago, but is quickly gathering lots of information on labor-related issues. There were some questions and some information was asked for regarding the vaccination schedule and update. So Ben, we're glad you're able to join us today to kind of give us a brief update on what's going on from a vaccination standpoint from COVID-19.
Thanks a lot, Ernie. I appreciate the opportunity to come give an update. We've had some interesting developments on this front. So for those of you that were here for the first webinar in the Ag Labor series, you'll remember we actually showed a slide that looked eerily familiar to this one. And so didn't really have any updates until Monday of this week, when our state COVID vaccination plan was updated. And most importantly, I think for all the folks on this call today, you see the exact text that was inserted by March 1st, 2021, all areas of the state may, as vaccine supplies are available, also implement vaccination of people who are frontline essential workers in the food processing and agriculture industries. So that's a pretty big development for us. You can see how that changes the schedule here. I've outlined in red. With that, we obviously out of the gate immediately began to get questions about, who specifically does that entail? How do folks go to begin getting in line? I think the first part of that question is still something we're working on. This uses a little bit different language than the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's definition of food and agriculture workers. So in reality, still trying to sort of parse through exactly who's included in the definition of agriculture. Later in the week, MDHHS did put out an FAQ that specifically indicated that restaurant workers were excluded from current vaccination eligibility in any of the categories. So other than that, really no guidance on specifically who's included in this. What we might consider as agricultural employers now is take the next step to try and consider how you can get your staff and your workers potentially vaccinated. All of this still runs through the local health department, so they are going to be the folks that are ultimately going to make the determination of whether a particular worker is classified as agricultural or food processing. From what we've heard from stakeholders is that there's just frankly a lot of disparity in how this takes place in practice. And so, if you're interested in pursuing this, now might be an appropriate time to make that contact with your local health department to submit those forms. Even that work happens in different ways. You may be able to submit a request as an employer. You may have to, just make it known to your employees they may be eligible. They'll have to submit their own request to be vaccinated. A lot of different protocols, but it does appear that beginning March 1st that many of those on the call today might be eligible for frontline staff to receive the vaccine. There is the caveat in that, frontline being someone that works within 6 feet of another worker or has interaction with the general public. But again, if your worker falls in that category, then starting March 1st, we should have the opportunity to have those folks begin to get in line. So pretty major development. There'll be a lot more news coming out on this as we continue to learn more as we get closer to the state, hopefully. But just wanted to make everyone on the call aware of what I think is, a positive first step in protecting some of the most vulnerable infrastructure we have in our food system and try and avoid some of the issues that we had last year. So with that, I'll go ahead and yield the floor back to Ernie, and we'll be happy to take any questions as we move forward.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate that update, and thanks for your work keeping track of the moving target here, so to speak, relative to all of the changes that are coming about at the state level with restrictions and rules and regulations surrounding COVID relative to the labor situation, and keeping track of things downtown from a state legislative standpoint on all the labor issues. We appreciate that because, again, there are plenty of activities that need to be keeping track of. So we greatly appreciate that. And you're going to be sticking around to help answer questions as well. So speaking of questions, we are going to transition to the question and answer portion of our program today. Again, last week we asked you folks to send in questions, and you responded with quite a number of them. And we are glad to have our experts from the last 4 weeks available today. Kim Clark from Varnum Law Firm, Lori Swanson from Great Lakes Ag Labor Services, John Cran with Michigan Farm Bureau, Ben Terrell with Michigan Farm Bureau, and Craig Anderson, who works in our ag labor area with Michigan Farm Bureau, all available to help answer those questions. Jason Rulig, who's a farmer from Monroe County, a vegetable farmer, and employs a considerable amount of labor, and also chairs the Michigan Farm Bureau Labor Advisory Committee, is going to handle the question and answer session during our program here this afternoon. Jason, we're glad you're able to join us. We appreciate your involvement in Farm Bureau and the level of expertise that you bring to the labor discussion from a farmer standpoint. Farm Bureau works because members get involved, and we appreciate the time that you put into the organization, helping to make things better on your farm operation, but helping to enhance and grow and protect our Michigan ag industry. And I guess that's an encouragement to all farmers listening in. There's always an opportunity to get involved and make a difference. Jason, you're one of those that does that on a daily basis, and we're glad to have you with us this afternoon to help disseminate those questions and get feedback from our panelists and experts. Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ernie. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here to ask these questions. We've got a great list of questions here today, and we've got a lot of questions. So we're going to jump right into this. The first set of questions that we've got here are in regards to H-2A visa worker programs. And the first question will be directed at Kim. So we'll jump right into this, Kim. Regarding H-2A workers arriving to Michigan, do they have to be isolated until a COVID test is scheduled and the results are available?
Yes, the Michigan emergency order is still in place that requires that individuals be isolated to the greatest extent possible. There is some language within the order that says, if not entirely possible, then there's some provisions with wearing the cloth face covering in the housing, except for eating, drinking, or taking care of personal hygiene. So those generally, yes, you're going to want to find isolation for them, but if not, there are some provisions that allow them to be within place. And it is really separation of the new workers coming in from existing ones. So if they're all coming in a group together, then those individuals can be housed together. But you can also meet the requirement of having a test before people arrive. And if they've had the test within 72 hours prior to arrival and it's negative, then you can avoid that isolation requirement.
Okay, very good. The next question for you, Kim. Are ag employers required to pay wages to H-2A visa workers while they are quarantined or isolated?
So there's a general requirement to pay H-2A workers the first week of employment, and typically employers will get them right to work. Well, with this quarantine and testing requirement, you may have that period where they're not working, but you still should pay them for that week. That payment will count towards the 3/4 guarantee, so it does give you some benefit under the H-2A rules. And for now, you may be able to get benefits under the FFCRA so that you could get those payments to the workers back in the form of a tax credit. That runs currently through March, and we'll see if it gets extended, but there's a potential to recoup those funds.
Okay, and the last question for you, Kim, before we switch to another expert. If an H-2A worker refuses the mandatory COVID test, does an ag employer have to terminate the H-2A worker? Is this cause for termination or an abscondment? And if so, how does the employer report this?
So hopefully this never happens, because the workers are going to know of this requirement when they're recruited and when they come. So, but if this does happen, there is probably the best opportunity to handle this is to allow abscondment, which is 5 days of no-show. So that gives the worker time to be reassessing their decision not to test. And then at the end of the 5 days, it happens as a matter of course under the regulations that they abscond rather than formally terminating. And it helps the employer avoid potential disputes over the termination issue because it happens as a matter of law. And if it's a domestic worker that is under the H-2A contract that does this abscondment, then it's reporting it to Department of Labor. If it's a foreign H-2A worker, it needs to be reported to USCIS, Immigration Services.
Okay, very good. The next question here is for John. John, are H-2A workers covered under the Payment Protection Plan, PPP, for lost wages? And if so, could you explain how?
So we continue to believe that H-2A workers do not qualify for PPP loans, even if the workers are here for more than 6 months. So we do know that in the last go round of legislation, they defined seasonal as being 6 months, but everything we read that they don't qualify. We have been seeking additional clarification from the Small Business Administration and guidance on this. A lot of people have been asking for that. I think this would really make this question easier to answer if we had some more guidance. But that being said, you are going to find variation from lender to lender, the bank you're working with, on how they interpret this. So you may talk to a farmer that has they've qualified and some that haven't. So keep that in mind. But no, we continue to ask for more guidance from SBA. So the shorter answer is no, but it depends.
Okay, very good. The next question that we have in regards to H-2A visa worker programs is for Lori. Lori, are H-2A visa holders eligible for a Michigan driver's license, and in particular, a CDL license? And are there any options to secure a license for H-2A visa holders?
Thank you, Jason. Yes, so a bit of information on this one. So H-2A workers are eligible for a Michigan's driver's license, but they must have a social security number and pass your standard written driving and vision test. But also keep in mind that for H-2A workers, they need to obtain a new social security card, and that can take up to several weeks. There is another option though. So without having a H-2A worker get a Michigan's driver's license, they can also use their individual foreign driver's license to drive while in the US. The acceptability of the foreign driver's license are held by non-residents is governed by, there's a treaty law, the federal law, and state laws. So something to consider there is any worker that falls in the country from one of these treaties are eligible to drive using their driver's license. Some of these countries include Mexico, Canada, South Africa, and Guatemala. So those workers from those treaty countries with non-commercial driver's licenses are able to drive passenger vehicles in any state while in the US, as long as they also have either an international driving permit or they need to have an English translation of their license. Going back to the CDL side of things, the only foreign commercial driver's license, so the only foreign CDLs that are accepted in the US are from the federal government of Mexico and provinces and territories in Canada. So it's important to also note that workers from Mexico must obtain a specific license. It's called the Licencia Federal de Conductor, or Federal Conductor License. It's issued by the Mexico Secretary of Communications and Transportation. And that is the only one that is recognized in the US. So if you are going to have a foreign worker use their foreign CDL, it needs to be from either Mexico or certain territories in Canada, and the one in Mexico in particular, because that's where most of the workers do come from. It needs to be issued by that Mexico Secretary of Communications and Transportation in order to be valid. So a lot of information there, but hopefully that does provide some options for employers.
Thank you, Lori. Next set of questions, back with Kim. If an H-2A worker refuses the mandatory COVID test, does an employer have to offer the employee housing?
Consistent with what we discussed about the 5-day process for abscondment, you wanted to house them during those 5 days. So at the end of the 5 days, if they're still refusing to test, they can be treated as absconded at that point and be advised that the housing would end.
Okay. And next question for you. What if an H-2A worker's family members refuse the mandatory COVID test? Does the ag employer have to offer the family housing? And how should this be handled?
So first, remember, this only applies to individuals 18 and over. So if they're under 18, they don't need to be tested. If it is someone 18 and over that's a family member, there's no specific penalties within the order like there is for work, where the individual cannot work until there is a negative test. So the best practice here, the best strategy is to continue to offer it during this period, and just kind of allow it to take its course, because typically you're going to have a worker that has done the testing that you want to work, and displacing their family will likely have you lose the worker.
Okay, very good. Next question again for Kim. If an ag employer does not have the housing capacity available for COVID positive employees or those that have to isolate, where can that employee be housed?
You can make temporary arrangements with a hotel or potentially an apartment complex if needed. What we saw happen quite a bit last summer is, as infection spread throughout a potential workforce, that you would have different units that would be COVID positive that could house COVID positive, and then others that were not, that were still COVID negative. And so it's kind of a shifting thing, but looking for some other arrangements outside your housing units would be helpful to be able to keep the illness isolated.
All right, very good. Next question is for Craig. Craig, is the state currently looking for available housing options for ag employers in the event that employees have to be isolated and quarantined?
Thank you, Jason. Last year, DHHS did in fact open statewide housing facilities for isolation. At this time, they have decided not to go the statewide route, excuse me, but they will be assisting on a local basis. So if there's a critical need on a local basis, DHHS has indicated that they may be able to help either with finding facilities or with funding facilities on an individual basis.
All right, very good. Back to you, Kim. Do ag employers have to follow the COVID housing requirements from last summer? If so, where can this information be found?
Yes, those requirements are still in place, and there's a few different areas that you could go to. You can go to michigan.gov. Coronavirus has the emergency orders there. You can also access your inspector, your MDARD inspector on housing, and they have information available. But I think the best resource for this, of course, is the Farm Bureau partnered employment guide that we have pulled together that kept updates coming throughout last year on all of the COVID developments and kept all our employers up to date.
Okay, very good. 2 more questions involved in the H-2A visa worker program topic. John, this one's for you. During this series, we learned that data from the Farm Labor Survey can determine the adverse effect wage rate. What would happen if every ag employee in Michigan refused to fill out the Farm Labor Survey?
Thanks, Jason. I don't know that we have a direct answer to this, but there's a couple of assumptions we could make. One is that in the case of Michigan, you've got 2 other states that are part of that data area, and so Minnesota and Wisconsin, I believe, and those in the wage could maybe be calculated using the data from those states, assuming that those states also filled it, or did choose to fill out the survey. But I think big picture, it's really tough to assume that everyone in Michigan would refuse to fill out the survey. There would be at least one person that filled it out, hypothetically, right? So that being the case, the data they're going to have is based on whatever's come in, and that could be advantageous, it could be disadvantageous. It just depends on who filled that out. And so that's why I think it's important to make sure we've got a good cross section of data that best represents and reflects the actual costs of what's being paid out there across the board. If someone else on the panel has something to add to this, please chime in. But we continue as Farm Bureau to communicate with USDA to better understand how this survey works, and we're going to continue to do that. And this is a good question we can pose to them next time we talk to them too, just to make sure we do fully understand this, and if they're able to share that.
Sure, makes sense. Thank you, John. Craig, last question in regard to H-2A visa worker program. Do you know of any software or software add-ons that could assist with compiling data that is required to fill out the farm labor survey?
I've taken a look at many of the software packages that are currently being used, and none of them have a direct link to be able to establish these. And one of the significant challenges is that you really need to look at the work activities for the individual that you have on the payroll for that specific week. So a general classification for a person throughout the course of the year may not be the appropriate information to put on that form. Generally, what I see, most software packages have the opportunity to run a report. And off of that report, it gives you the opportunity to select and add or subtract to given job classifications. And I find that that probably is the most expedient level. And understand and remember that we talked about the bonus structure, the piece rate structure, and those pieces are very important. And you do have them in your records under the Michigan Payment of Wages and Fringe Benefits Act requirements. So pull those out and address the individual. Many operations are now beginning to address how they are going to make the report at this time of the year. They have a little bit of an opportunity to find out what they anticipate to be the covered workers for that particular week.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Craig. We're going to shift gears a little bit from the H-2A visa worker program to now the questions will be in addressing domestic labor. And the first question here on domestic labor is for Lori. Lori, if a neighboring farm offers employment to their neighbor's employees, which some may consider as stealing labor, does an ag employer have any legal claim against their neighbor? And if so, how can ag employees protect themselves from worker theft?
Thank you, Jason. Regarding the legal claim, you would need to review the specific facts of the situation with an attorney to determine whether you have any cause of action against the neighbor farm. But generally, workers can decide between their opportunities for employment. What employers can do, however, is review their own job opportunities with their workers, collect feedback on worker satisfaction, on options to improve job opportunities, and continue to work on building a team that workers want to be a part of. Really, it's just going to be more focused on maybe a worker survey. I know some employers do those at the end of the year to really understand how the year went for the workers from their perspective. So collecting feedback will give you a good idea as far as how workers are feeling, and then hopefully also help you in implementing some items that would prevent workers from pursuing other opportunities.
Okay, thank you, Lori. Next question is for Ben. For some ag employers, most of their workers are currently drawing unemployment. There is a concern that employees will not return to work. Can employers encourage their employees to return to work?
Thanks, Jason. So as we've discussed before, a lot of the guidelines here in Michigan are centered around the COVID preparedness and response plan. And so I think maybe a very logical approach might be to share that plan and the measures that you as an employer have taken to create a safe workplace. What's going to be happening in terms of cleaning and sanitation, screening protocols, all of it. So that might be a very effective way to help people understand that your workplace is now a safe place to be and come back to work.
Okay, thank you, Ben. And the next 4 questions we have here are for Kim. Kim, in regards to domestic labor, is it required that all new employees, regardless of their job description on the farm, are 18 years and older, have to be COVID tested and have to wait for the test results before starting work?
Yes, that Michigan order remains in place for agricultural workers. And so before they can begin in-person work, they need to have that negative test. The one other qualifying factor is that it needs to be 20 employees or more. So if you are a smaller farm that is under 20 employees, this order does not apply to you.
Okay. And how does the COVID testing apply to employees that were tested in 2020 and have remained on staff since then? Are they required to be retested in 2021?
No, they would not be a new employee for purposes of the order, so they would not need to be retested.
All right. And if an employee took a COVID test and the employer paid for it, can the employee go back to work if they have not told the employer the results? How does an employer handle this?
So the order specifically requires that the employee provide the negative test result before work can begin. So the employer can refer to the emergency order and ask the employee for the negative result so that the employee can be allowed to work. We had a lot of issues with local health departments last year and with HHS really wanting to keep that privacy of the individual's results without really looking at the order and understanding, well, the employee has to get that over to the employer in order for the person to work. So employer is completely justified under that order asking for the results.
Okay. And if an employee who has remained on staff since 2020 went outside the US, does the employee have to be COVID tested and isolated while waiting for the test results?
So there's no requirement under the Michigan order, but practically speaking, if the person is traveling by air, there is now the requirement for individuals traveling back into the US by air to have a negative COVID test. So that kind of covers it from a different angle. But under the Michigan rules, if the person has remained on staff and is not a new employee, there is no requirement for the test.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Kim. All right, Craig, this question is for you. After listening to last week's Ag Labor series and hearing about the local school to work program, a listener contacted their local school and they indicated they are not participating in the school to work program. Who could they contact to see about getting this program started in this school?
Thank you. We are working on putting together a resource list for the contacts as the federal regulations had changed over the past couple of years. And because of COVID in how Michigan Department of Education is functioning, we don't have real good information as to who the contact folks are. And we're working to pull together additional templates, for example, with Michigan State University and their ag tech structure to be able to provide these guidance documents to the community. We do intend on having this resource posted at the Michigan Farm Bureau resource page as we get it developed. And we'll also post the contact folks for the college base, the 12 colleges that do have an internship program in coordination with the Michigan State Ag program.
Thank you, Craig. And one more question for you. If a high school refuses to assist with a school to work program, who could be contacted to see about getting this program started?
Again, we're looking to put together that specific contact structure. We've had a lot of interest from programs that have folks with that are under an IEPC, for example, to be able to have that individual go into a school to work program. So there's a lot of pressure right now being placed on MDE to come up with a guidance structure that allows this program to function.
Again, thank you, Craig. The next question and the last question in our domestic labor topic is for Lori. Lori, on the I-9 form, is it required to check a box in section 1 regarding immigration and citizenship status?
Thank you, Jason. Yes, the form instructions do require a box be checked to attest to an immigration or citizenship status. The employer is responsible for section 1 being complete, but they're not responsible for how the employee decides to complete that section.
Okay, thank you, Lori. The next topic is on further resources for ag employers. We've got a question here for Kim. This question is, there is currently an overwhelming amount of information that ag employers have to understand. Everything from COVID compliance, anti-discrimination, wage and hour implications, Americans with Disabilities Act, and the FMLA. Where can ag employer go for assistance with understanding all of these issues?
Well, this is something that has been a partnership with Farm Bureau and Varnum the entire 20 years plus now that I've been doing this. And, you know, in the early years, we would have these sessions like this and farmers would come once a year and they'd have what they thought they needed for the year. And about 6 years ago, and even before that, we had the written books that were distributed and updated yearly. About 6 years ago, we decided we needed to get this really comprehensive approach in a much more user-friendly way. So we created this online employment guide. It has all of those different topics that you just asked about, Jason, and it has it broken down into really short summaries. And it was your advisory council that helped me get that as short as I possibly could, because I brought in a template and I quickly learned that if I don't put words in the right order, that farm employers are going to stop reading and they get the wrong answer. And so I really am grateful for the partnership with Michigan Farm Bureau that we've been able to pull this resource together and build on it each year. And so every year we add more sections, more frequently asked questions, more resources. And that was really highlighted over the COVID experience because we were out with a preparedness and response plan before the state. We had the state asking us for us. We had many other stakeholders who were just asking us to hand over our plan. And we're like, we'd be happy to do that, but we invest in this every year and it's a subscription service and we value our subscribers and what they've invested in us to be able to keep this up. So I strongly encourage all of you to check it out this year. It's an annual subscription. Just try it out for a year. Come to our sessions next week, Tuesday through Thursday. You'll hear the in-depth, hands-on, how do you handle things approach that we really try to implement through the guide. And I know that all of our subscribers return. I mean, there are very few that don't come back year after year. So please give it a try.
Sure. Thank you, Kim. Thank you for putting all those compliances together for us. That's a great assistance. Moving on, the next question, Ernie, this one's for you. Will Michigan Farm Bureau continue to educate and aid employers throughout 2021 with issues surrounding ag labor through videos and or the emails that we have been receiving from this series?
Absolutely, we will continue to do that. That's part of our responsibility, at Michigan Farm Bureau, is to make sure that our members are updated, aware, and educated on issues that are impacting them. We will certainly get our team back together and look at future opportunities for online learning, if you will, virtual learning. And we certainly hope that sometime here in the near future, we can actually meet in person, because we would all like the opportunity to do that. And that was the original plan when we put this series of meetings together, was to go out across the state with about a dozen different meetings in person and face to face, and allow for interaction and feedback. And that obviously couldn't happen this year. So we made an adjustment and decided to do the online virtual learning and updates. And I think it's worked out very well. We will continue to utilize the Michigan Farm News for information. So we always encourage people to check out the daily version of the eFarm News along with the print version for updates on information. As everyone hopefully has learned, we have a wealth of knowledge at Michigan Farm Bureau regarding labor, and our partners at Varnum Law Firm, Great Lakes Ag Labor Services, and then our internal staff as well on issues. So we will continue to provide those updates as needed. And the things are changing on a daily basis, so we need to continue to bring that information to people.
Thank you, Ernie. Farm Bureau continues to find very innovative ways to reach us. If you're a technology person, you get it via email. If you like to pick up the paper, you get the Michigan Farm News. So thank you for that. The next topic is on vaccinations, and we're going to look to Ben first on this question. Ben, should employers educate employees about COVID-19 vaccination and assist migrants who may not have the means to schedule or to get to vaccination appointments, or should the employer take a neutral position?
Well, Jason, I think as we're starting to learn as the vaccine rollout continues that people have differing feelings about vaccination and different philosophies, and so I'll sidestep the word should a little bit. I think all accounts are that the vaccine is safe and effective, but if you as an employer feel compelled to disseminate information to your employees about vaccination, then by all means. And as we've heard, employers, not just in agriculture but in all sectors, have incentivized their employees to be vaccinated to various extents. And so that's a decision that you as an employer can make. If you're interested in more information, there's a lot out there. Specifically, the Protect Michigan Commission is sort of a group that's working on promoting vaccination more broadly. And so there's a lot of resources out there if you choose to make those available.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Ben. Next two questions in regards to vaccinations are for Kim. Kim, can the federal and or state government or any other agency make the COVID vaccination mandatory?
Well, one thing's for sure, during COVID, we've seen a lot of things that we never thought we would see, including the mandatory testing in Michigan of agricultural workers. But what we're hearing about mandatory vaccinations is at the federal level, at least, it's not within their power. So the only way that they could do it is if they tied it to a specific benefit, like a passport. The states and cities can do mandatory vaccine requirements within their public health powers. But from a practical perspective, all the indicators are that we're not going to see mandatory vaccine requirements, but rather we're going to continue to see encouragement, information, but not the mandate. And even if there were a mandate, there's going to need to be exceptions for medical issues or religious reasons to avoid impairing people's individual liberties. So we faced some of those same issues again with testing last year, and we thought we had an argument that would have stopped that. And we are finding that in COVID, it seems like all rules are out the window. So I can't say for sure that it's never going to happen, but all indicators are that we will not have mandatory vaccines.
Okay, thank you. And one more question for you. Once agricultural workers are vaccinated, can they stop using face masks?
No, the CDC requirements are still that even post-vaccine, to the extent that you are in a situation that is requiring a mask, that you need to continue to wear it.
Okay. Thank you. And Craig, question for you in regards to vaccinations. Can an employer require their employee to inform them that they have been vaccinated?
As Kim earlier indicated, that we do have the opportunity to request this information. Now, from the standpoint of the vaccine, we don't have direct guidance from EEOC. However, they do indicate that the request for a proof of vaccination is not a disability-related inquiry. However, they do caution us that if we request the information, we really need to do it in terms of a job-related, and it is consistent with a business necessity to have that vaccination. And then also that the healthcare provider, as Kim indicated, we had difficulty in terms of getting some of the positive, negative responses last year. We really need to communicate that we're not seeking that they provide any medical information, just simply the proof that the vaccine was administered.
Okay, thank you, Craig. And the last set of questions that we have are in regards to COVID daily symptom checks. Ben, this first question is for you. This question is regarding the daily COVID symptom check of employees. Does an employer have to notify the health department or MIOSHA of a worker who indicated yes to any or all of the daily symptom check questions? If so, how quickly do they have to report this, and how do they report this?
Well, Jason, in terms of the daily symptom check questions, the short answer is no. They're not required to report those. But it is important to keep in mind that if you have a positive COVID test, immediately contact your local public health department, and then follow their direction. Moving forward, it's also important to keep in the back of your mind that if a hospitalization does occur, that you need to notify MIOSHA within 24 hours. And God forbid, if you have a fatality, notify MIOSHA within 8 hours of that event. So those are some things to keep in mind for required notifications.
Okay, thank you, Ben. And Craig, the last 3 questions are for you. During a daily COVID symptom check of employees, if an employee indicates yes to any of the symptom checks every Friday, the employer believes that the employee is indicating yes to avoid working that day. Do you have any suggestions on how you might handle this situation?
Well, generally, we need to accept what the employee provides. Now, with that said, recognize we do have CDC guidance in terms of return to work, and that's probably the best practice to take a look at. So there are 2 structures in which we look at return to work. And the first one is essentially a symptoms-based or isolation-based structure. And there you would have a return to work 10 days after symptoms first appeared, and that's important, 24 hours without a fever, without fever reducing medications, and again, other symptoms of COVID-19 are improving. So that's the first structure. Remember, that's for the isolation where there's a pretty strong indication that the person had, through their symptoms, COVID-19. The second side is the quarantine, and the quarantine is where you're looking at people who have had exposure or potential exposure. Their CDC modified a little bit of the return to work structure. And the first one is after 10 days without testing. So that's better than the 14. And then after 7 days from receiving a negative test, but the test must occur on day 5 or later. So those are the 2 areas to take a look at. Now, from the standpoint of general discipline, understand that by virtue of the fact that the person did indicate a positive, or not a positive, but a symptoms-based structure, you really should look at the return to work protocol to assure that you're meeting this requirement.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Next question for you. For the annual reporting of all injuries, the log 300, when and how should I record the COVID daily symptom check?
As Ben indicated, generally, you're not going to record the daily symptoms check. That is not a recordable issue. Now, when does a COVID-related issue become a recordable injury? The first structure is that it is an actual case. In other words, we have a positive test, or we have some form of confirmation that the person is under investigation and is a presumptive positive, and then has laboratory confirmation. So those would be recordable. The second structure is you would have to determine if it is work-related. And work-related is not necessarily meaning that a person at work has COVID. And then the third criteria, does it involve one of the record-keeping requirements? So does it go and have medical treatment beyond first aid? Does it include days away from work? And all 3 of these criteria would be necessary for it to be a recordable injury. And remember that that summary of the injuries needs to be posted from February 1st through April 30th. So now let's back up a little bit and talk about the work-related structure. Generally, what MIOSHA has indicated, and this is also from federal OSHA, when there are several cases among workers, it can be presumed that it is work-related. The second area is it likely work-related if they contracted shortly after a lengthy close contact situation, either with a particular customer or with coworkers. And the third area is if they had frequent and close exposure to the general public and became positive with COVID. Now, there are some areas that aren't part of work-related determinations. And the primary one there is where you take a look at contact outside. So for example, let's say there's a community event within our worker population, and that a large number of people who attended that community event, whether it be in a public place or whether it be at a private residence, are positive. OSHA is indicating that no, that would not be work related. The second area is contact with a non-coworker, and the third area is where you have employee exposures of an individual nature. In other words, a family member, for example, is known to have tested positive. So you do need to go through, check the current reporting and recording structure to determine whether or not you have it. But bottom line, if you do have a hospitalization, if you do have a positive, and if you do, hopefully we don't have any fatality that is work related, those would be recordable. And if it is a fatality or hospitalization, remember we need to report a hospitalization within 24 hours of our knowing it to occur, and a fatality within 8 hours from the point that we knew it occurred.
Okay, thank you, Craig. And the last question for you today, and the last question of our list here, is the CDC regularly says masks are PPE. If masks are considered PPE, which MyOSHA requirement do I need to follow?
Thank you. A mask by definition is not PPE under the OSHA standards, and that's very important in how you treat it. Now, in many cases, some employers have looked towards an N95 mask. An N95 mask is a respirator and would fall into the requirements. So in our agricultural side, if we as the employer require an N95 mask, then we need to look at Part 700 that requires an employer to train the workers in the use of the equipment. It requires an opportunity for that worker to become familiar with proper donning and doffing of the respirator, and also have it fit test properly. Now that testing structure is really the face piece and face shield, assuring that both the employee knows how to do it and that it does have a seal. Now, if we're looking at non-agricultural work activities done on the farm, then the full respirator protocol will come into play, and that includes medical evaluation. That is done by an outside party, and then a formal fit testing activity by the employer or a third party. And then we need to do training on the use, cleaning, and storage of that respirator as personal protective equipment.
Okay, thank you, Craig. That concludes all of the questions that were submitted. Certainly appreciate everybody submitting the questions. A wide array of topics and a lot of questions that I'm sure we all needed the answers to. So much appreciated.
Thanks, Jason. Great job. And thanks to all of the folks who helped to answer the questions. That was a lot of information, and kind of outlined and highlighted why this series of meetings were important to you, our members, and the viewers out across the state, wanting information and an opportunity for us to provide that information to you. We've got about 8 minutes left in our program today, and what we'd like to conclude with is just kind of wrap up comments from the specialists that we have had on the program with us the last 4 weeks. And Jason, even though you're new to the program this week, I'm going to ask you to go first, because from a farmer, these issues impact you more than they impact everyone else. The group of speakers that have been with us the last 4 weeks all work daily to try to provide the answers that you need, and to make your life on the farm better, so to speak, in terms of dealing with labor regulations. But from a farmer perspective, any comments that you would like to add? And then we're going to go to Kim and Lori, and we'll wrap up with Craig and Ben and John. So Jason, you get first stab at this.
Well, sure. I guess, one of the things that comes to my mind is just the array of things that as farmers we need to know. There's just such a vast amount of information on all of these topics that the questions entailed. And it's impossible to, I feel it's impossible to know everything. And especially, with the introduction of the COVID pandemic, and as you try to maintain compliance throughout, very, very difficult to, cross all your T's and dot all of your I's. And so, what you guys have put together, and I've gone back and I've watched some of the review from the sessions that you've had, and just incredibly useful information, and to be able to use that as a reference, and Kim, the handbook that you put together there, again, such a great resource. So the ability to access this stuff in an organized manner is really priceless, especially when you find yourself in a situation where perhaps you're having an audit or something of that nature. Some place to go to get some answers is just priceless.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments very much. Kim, you were referenced there. We're going to go to you next, and then to Lori, and hopefully between the two of you, you will talk about the program that you have next week, an opportunity to highlight that or to put a plug in for it. So Kim, we'll go to you for some wrap-up comments. I want to say thank you on behalf of Michigan Farm Bureau for helping us out the past couple of weeks. We've appreciated your knowledge and information and the ongoing relationship that we have with Farnam Law. Kim?
Well, thank you, everyone, for the partnership. It has been a really successful way, I think, to get information to the farmers and to, like Jason said, have it in an organized, easily accessible manner. But I do want to just kind of review what the subscription entails. It is an opportunity to have online access 24/7 anytime you need to go in and find information that's available to you. Beyond the text of the summary that we have all the resources directly to government links. So all of that is accessible right through the guide. Then we have frequently asked questions where your answers, like today, all of these questions and answers get recorded and put into that organized manner so they're accessible. And then I think probably what gets used the most are our templates. So we have created templates and put them on the system. So many times in the early years, I would see documents that I had helped somebody with come back in a different entity with some changes to them. We decided to just put that out there and be available for you because we want to help you with compliance. So those documents are there and they're easy to read through. They need to be customized. I will tell you that. I want you to take them and use them as the tool to really kind of review your operations and make sure that those documents are meaningful to your operations. Now, turning to next week and what that entails, that's also included within our guide subscription, as we always have an in-depth annual seminar. We usually do one day in 4 different locations, a full day. This year, because of COVID, we're doing these 3 days, 2-hour sessions. But you're really going to get in-depth in those conversations and help you solve your problems. So we always start with what do we need to be prepared for in 2021? We've got a new administration. What does that mean from both the DOL compliance, but we also still have COVID going on, so all the OSHA issues. And there's immigration reform that's, as John Cran talked about. So we have all of those things. And we have the things that we learned over the last year of the different issues that resulted with workers that we wanted to help address. So we're going to have that. And we have the ever popular mock audits that are going to be COVID style this year, and an H2A session really focused with GLEL. So I'll pass it on to Lori and let her talk about that.
Lori, Great Lakes Ag Labor Services has been an important part of solving the employment problem here in Michigan the last few years. We're glad that you and Sarah and your team were able to help out with our series. Any closing comments from you?
Thank you, Ernie. Yeah, so we are part of the Michigan Farm Bureau family of companies. Great Lakes Ag Labor started, just like what you said, Ernie, from a need for labor. It was really comments from our members wanting some help in this area, and that's what we're here for. So we hope that anybody who is interested in looking into H2A to reach out to us. We have a wonderful partnership with Farnam Law. As Kim was mentioning, we have a series of different seminars happening next week. So 3 days, Wednesday being the H2A specific one. So we just encourage everyone to attend, but any interest in H2A, any interest in knowing what that is, seasonal workers, feel free to reach out to Great Lakes Ag Labor Services. That's why we're here for. That's why we were started. So we'd be more than happy to assist any way that we can.
Thank you very much. And thanks for helping out. We greatly appreciate it. Craig Anderson, you've been dealing with labor and safety issues longer than probably anybody involved in the program the last 4 weeks. Any wrap-up comments you would like to provide to the group? And thank you for your service and all the great work that you have done over the years dealing with labor and safety issues.
Thank you, Ernie. Varnum Law and Michigan Farm Bureau have long been advocates for the farm community and our members. This past year has really identified probably the need more than ever to be able to communicate what our questions are. In many meetings that we had throughout the course of the past 12 months or so, the agencies have indicated that they simply didn't hear from anyone that why is this an issue? We haven't heard anything about this. That's where activities like this become very important. We really need input, particularly since we're not able to be out in the field for many of our partnering organizations. We need the input to be able to properly communicate the issues that arise for you. And so we will take these questions and integrate them in terms of how we are dealing in getting information for you.
Thank you, Craig, and thanks for your service to the farmers across the state over all of these years. Ben, we're going to go to you next. You're relatively new to staff, but you've been involved in the agricultural industry your entire life. You've jumped in with both feet into learning this labor issue, and things are changing on a daily basis downtown from a state legislative and regulatory standpoint. Any closing comments you would like to provide?
Thanks, Ernie. I guess just real briefly, I'll sort of echo Craig's sentiments. Just keep in touch and let us know what you see on the ground. I mean, this is a very dynamic environment, and you know, as we see this rollout, especially in terms of vaccine and COVID enforcement, it tends to differ from place to place, and so you just have to keep us apprised so we can share those stories with legislators, and so we continue to get these issues, you know, taken to them and see changes made. So stay tuned. There's going to be more, unfortunately, too. We hear, you know, more coming in terms of some housing rules that might be issued and things like that. So stay tuned, and we'll continue to work for you.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for your comments. Thanks for your great work. John Cran, you get to wrap this up for us from a comment standpoint. I think I've got everyone included then. You're working on these issues on a daily basis from a national standpoint. Any wrap-up comments that you would like to provide to us? Because it certainly is going to be an interesting year in Washington, D.C.
Sure. Thanks, Ernie. I just want to start by saying, you know, just looking at the number of panelists that we have here today shows how complex these issues are, and that shows how we are working on multiple levels to address the needs and concerns you bring forward. Federal being just one part of that. And we're going to keep advocating on your behalf every day to make sure that we can help you navigate through this uncertainty, and hopefully have a labor market you can depend on for the long run, for generations. But we need you to do your part too. Continue to talk to your elected officials, tell them your story, help them understand why these things need to change and how they need to change. We will do that, but it also means a lot for them to hear directly from you as farmers, as voting constituents. So thank you for this opportunity, and we'll hopefully cross paths again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that. On behalf of all of our panelists that we've had the last 4 weeks, I want to say thank you to all of you who tuned in. You heard the theme a couple of times today about being involved and making your voice heard. You know, the world is run by those who show up, and we need your input. We need to hear when there are concerns around the state and when you need additional information. We've got great resources that we can help provide you with the answers and the solutions that you want, but we need to know when there are challenges out there that you all face. We appreciate you tuning in. We certainly hope that you have found the last 4 weeks to be very educational and knowledgeable and valuable to you as farmers and ag employers and employees across the state. We'll continue to reach out and provide that information on a timely basis that you all need. So I want to say stay safe farming. Thanks to all of you for all that you do, providing the food and fiber for our consumers here in Michigan, across the country, and throughout the world. We've got a great industry in this state, backed up and supported by fantastic people, and it's you, the people, that make the difference. So stay safe farming. Thanks for joining us, and take care, everyone.
Ernie, I have one last comment since we are culminating this program. Audrey Siebold has just done an absolutely fabulous job in communicating the time, the location, and putting together the Zoom structure. And I really want to thank her for her services there.
Okay, you're most welcome. You're most
Absolutely,
welcome.
Greg, and thank you, Audrey, for all you have done. It's gone flawlessly, so we appreciate the great work. Awesome job.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Take care, everyone. Bye.